Good evening from the Channel's newsroom in London. 4 men have been charged with murdering the passengers and crew of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, which crashed almost 5 years ago. 298 people were on board the plane, which was flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it was shot down over eastern Ukraine. Dutch investigators have issued international arrest warrants for 3 Russians and a Ukrainian, saying there's evidence to prove they were behind the attack.
Ook plaatsen we hen op de nationale en internationale opsporingslijsten. En om die reden maken we de volledige namen bekend en tonen we hun foto's. De 4 personen waarom het gaat. Als eerste Igor Girkin, Sergei Dubinsky, Oleg Pulatov and Leonid Kharchenko.
A court case will begin in the Netherlands in March next year. Russia has responded by saying it doesn't trust the findings. A United Nations expert says there's credible evidence that Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince was responsible for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The journalist was last seen at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October. It's thought his body was dismembered and removed from the building. 11 unidentified people are on trial behind closed doors in the Gulf Kingdom, but the UN's Agnes Callamard says it fails to meet international standards and the proceedings should be suspended.
I do not have evidence regarding who has ordered the killing. What I do have is evidence suggesting that the responsibilities of high-level officials may be engaged and therefore is requiring further investigation, in particular of the Crown Prince, for a variety of reasons. The first one is that the people directly implicated in the murder reported to him. It is a logical step for me to be asking for him to be included in the sanctions until and unless there is evidence provided that he was not involved, didn't know, should not have known of the execution.
The US Navy says mine fragments recovered after the oil tanker attacks in the Gulf of Oman resemble those that belong to Iran. Officials showed debris and a magnet they said they'd recovered from the Japanese-owned Kokuka Courageous. The vessel, along with the Norwegian-owned Front Altair, was hit by explosions last week and was later towed to the Emirati coast. Tehran has denied any involvement.
What I can tell you is that the limpet mine that was used in the attack is distinguishable, and it is also strikingly bearing a resemblance to Iranian mines that have already been publicly displayed in Iranian military parades. This type of attack is a threat to international freedom of navigation in international waters, as well as freedom of commerce.
Authorities are investigating the deaths of dozens of people in central Mali. Unidentified gunmen targeted 2 villages. The victims are said to be mostly from the Dogon group. It's the latest incident in a series of attacks. Last week, 35 people were killed when the Dogon village of Sobanadar was hit. And in March, more than 130 Fulani people were killed during an attack on another village. The government's being criticised for not doing enough to stop the violence. The number of displaced people has hit a record high, with more than 70 million fleeing violence globally last year. That's an average of 37,000 new displacements every day. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 2/3 of the world's refugees come from 5 countries: Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar and Somalia. Figures also show developing countries, not rich Western nations, are bearing the brunt of the crisis.
When you say Europe has a refugee emergency, or the United States or Australia, no. Most of the refugees are in fact in the countries next to where the war is. And unfortunately that means mostly in poor countries or in middle-income countries. That's where the crisis is. That's where we need to focus.
Ethiopia has started rationing electricity, rolling out daily power cuts. The country announced the move last week, saying a drop in water levels at hydroelectric dams has led to a production deficit. Businesses are now being forced to rely on generators to stay open. The country's also suspended export to neighbouring Djibouti and Sudan, contracts which are worth $82 million a year. And finally, while drought is taking its toll in Africa, the evidence of climate climate change is also stark in Greenland. An image of a dog sled team running into water has gone viral. Unusually warm weather hit the Northern Territory last week, and an estimated 2 billion tonnes of ice was lost in just one day on June the 13th when the photo was taken. Climate change experts say the annual melt has started early. And that's your international news around the world in 5.